much stronger, faster learning results. Fifth, some learners who follow the just listen approach very strictly, avoiding speaking for a long time, can actually develop unnecessary anxiety around speaking later, simply because they've delayed it for so long. There's a reasonable argument that waiting too long to start speaking can make that eventual first step feel even more intimidating rather than less. Part 4. What research says. Beyond Krashen's original theory, it's worth mentioning that language acquisition research has continued to develop significantly since Krashen's original theories in the 1970s and 1980s. More recent researchers have proposed additional ideas that build on and sometimes challenge his original input hypothesis. One important additional idea is called the output hypothesis, proposed by a researcher named Merrill Swain. This theory suggests that producing language, meaning speaking or writing, also plays an important active role in language learning, not just receiving input passively. According to this view, the act of trying to produce language forces learners to notice gaps in their own knowledge, which they might not notice through listening alone. For example, when you're only listening, you can often understand a sentence without noticing every small grammar detail within it. But when you try to produce that same sentence yourself, you're suddenly forced to actively choose the correct verb tense, the correct word order, the correct preposition, decisions that listening alone doesn't necessarily require you to make. Another relevant idea is called noticing, proposed by a researcher named Richard Schmidt. This theory suggests that learners need to consciously notice specific language features in order to fully acquire them, rather than simply being exposed to them repeatedly without any awareness at all. This suggests that combining input with some level of conscious attention, noticing new grammar patterns, new vocabulary, new pronunciation features, may accelerate learning beyond what pure unconscious exposure alone can achieve. Taken together, this more recent research suggests that Krashen's original theory, while genuinely valuable, may not be the complete picture. A combination of understandable input, active output through speaking and writing, and some conscious noticing of language patterns likely produces stronger, more well-rounded results than any single approach used entirely alone. Part 5. A more balanced, realistic approach. So, does no study, just listen actually work? The honest answer is, it works really well as one major part of a complete approach, but probably not as the only method, especially for adult learners with limited time. Here's what's worth trying instead. Make listening the foundation of your learning, but combine it with small amounts of focused practice elsewhere. Spend the majority of your study time listening to content you genuinely enjoy, at a level where you understand most, but not absolutely everything. Alongside that, occasionally look up a grammar pattern you keep noticing but don't fully understand. You don't need to study grammar constantly, but a small amount of targeted clarification can help speed up patterns you'd otherwise take years to fully absorb through listening alone. Also, make sure you're eventually combining listening with actual speaking practice, even if it starts small. Understanding a huge amount of English but never actually speaking it will only get you halfway to genuine fluency, especially if your goal is real conversation, not just comprehension. Based on the output hypothesis we just discussed, that speaking practice isn't just useful for building fluency directly, it may actually help you notice and absorb new grammar patterns more effectively too. Choosing the right content matters enormously here too. Look for content that's genuinely interesting to you personally and roughly at your level, understandable, but still slightly challenging. Content that's either too easy or far too difficult provides much weaker learning value than something right in that comfortable challenge zone described earlier as I+1. A practical weekly structure might look something like this. Several hours of enjoyable active listening throughout the week, A small amount of time, maybe 20 or 30 minutes total, reviewing grammar points you keep noticing, and regular speaking practice, even if it's just 15 minutes a few times a week with a language partner, tutor, or simply talking to yourself out loud. Part 6. A story about balancing listening and studying. Let's look at a story that illustrates this balance nicely. Picture two learners who started studying English at almost exactly the same time. One of them followed the no study, just listen approach almost completely, watching English shows and listening to podcasts for hours every single day without any grammar study at all. After about a year, his listening comprehension was genuinely excellent. He could understand fast, natural English with very little difficulty. But when he tried to speak, he often paused for a long time, unsure how to organize his sentences correctly, even though he clearly understood the meaning perfectly well. He described the experience as knowing exactly what he wanted to say in his head, but somehow not being able to physically produce it smoothly out loud. The other learner combined heavy listening with just a small amount of focused grammar study, maybe 15 minutes a few times a week, plus regular speaking practice with a language partner. After that same year, her listening comprehension was strong too, though maybe slightly behind the first learners. But her speaking ability was noticeably more confident and organized because she had been actively practicing that specific skill the whole time, not just absorbing input passively. Interestingly, after about 18 months, the first learner started adding some speaking practice into his own routine as well. He noticed something surprising. Because his listening comprehension was already so strong, his speaking ability actually improved very quickly once he started practicing it directly. His huge foundation of understandable input seemed to make the speaking practice far more effective than it might have been without that foundation already in place. Neither approach was wrong, exactly. Both learners made real, genuine progress, and both eventually became comfortable, confident English speakers. But this comparison really shows why a balanced approach, combining lots of listening with some active practice, tends to produce more complete, well-rounded results faster, especially if your goal includes comfortable, confident speaking within a realistic time frame. Quick listening check. All right, time for our listening check. Question 1. Which linguist developed the input hypothesis that this whole approach is based on? Stephen Krashen. Question 2. What is the output hypothesis and who proposed it? The idea that producing language, speaking or writing, also plays an important, active role in learning by helping learners notice gaps in their knowledge. It was proposed by Merrill Swain. Question 3. What does I+1 refer to? Input that's just one small step above your current level, understandable but still slightly challenging. Question 4. In the story, what happened to the first learner's speaking ability once he eventually started practicing it directly? It improved very quickly, likely because of the strong listening foundation he had already built. Great job if you remembered all 4 of those. That's all for today's extended episode of English Speaking Hub. We talked about where the no study, just listen idea comes from, why it genuinely works well in many ways, where it falls short on its own, some additional research beyond Krashen's original theory, how to build a more balanced realism. If there's one thing to take from today, it's this. Listening should absolutely be a huge part of your routine. But don't be afraid to add small amounts of targeted study and speaking practice alongside it, especially if your goal is genuine, confident conversation within a realistic amount of time. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. See you in the next episode of English Speaking Hub. Bye for now.